All right, it looks like I'm live again. There's my little power riff in the background. Taking it easy today again. So, I'm going to carry on with one of my many books I'm reading. But today I'm going to carry on with The Chin, The Life and Crimes of Mafia Boss, Vincent Gigante, by Larry McShane. All of these books seem to overlap one another. So I left off on page 19. I wanted to read for an hour again, so why not? I was watching somebody else's show and I thought, I'm going to read my own thing. So the meal was followed by a card game with Luciano himself to use the men's room, excusing himself to use the men's room. The sounds of gunfire soon rang out inside the quiet Italian restaurant. According to Luciano, the shooters included Genovese Siegel and Albert Anastasia's. Mazzieri's body was riddled by half a dozen bullets, and his body was found still holding the ace of spades in one hand. That's where we left off yesterday, or the other day. The killing, rather than assuring peace, brought only more death. And Luciano expected the murder to grease his ascension as a boss equal to Maranzano, only to find the new boss was just like the old boss. Maranzano declared himself king of the New York underworld and the #1 boss in the nation. Luciano's anger festered and his impatience grew. His feelings were shared by colleagues who felt Maranzano was just another mustache Pete. Their derisive terms for mobsters passed their expiration date. Another plot was hatched on September 10th, 1931. 4 men appeared waving badges at Maranzano's Tony offices atop the landmark Grand Central Terminal. The boss's unarmed security force, surprised by their arrival and cowed by the badges, let them inside. Maranzano was stabbed and shot repeatedly, his blood pooling on the office floor as the life ebbed from his body. The Castellamar's war was over, with both its chief combatants claimed as mob fatalities. The survivors sorted things out, agreeing the day of a single boss claiming infallibility while lining his pockets was done. There would instead be 5 bosses, each with a vote on business and a seat on what became the Mafia's ruling commission. The head of the family that would become known as the Genovese was headed by Luciano himself. Genovese became his right-hand man, the Frank Costello among his top lieutenants, and Frank Costello. The mob's boom years were about to arrive, and so was Vincent Gigante, just 3 years old when the war ended. The Chin was an undistinguished schoolboy, posting average grades before dropping out of school in his sophomore year of high school. He later enrolled in a trade school where he played on the football team and, by his own recollection, became socially active. School was fun. Eh. Years later, he recounted a suspicion from that time. Although he could not remember the details, the first hints of his future career soon appeared, although the details are lost to history. Gigante's initial arrest came when he was age 14. With the juvenile record sealed, even federal prosecutors decades later knew nothing of the case. When he was 16 years old, the Chin was finished with his formal education and eager to learn the lessons of the crowded neighborhood streets. Gigante was never bothered by his lack of schooling, and later in life he turned it into a punchline. Ask decades um, down the road to spell world backwards, he informed an inquiring psychiatrist, "We'll be here all day." Vincent's post-education interests were simple: the boxing ring and the street corners of the village. Vincent was what he was, a kid from the block, said Louis Gigante. What did he do as a kid, 16 years old? He was running crap games. A sin? Maybe in the eyes of some jerks back then. Las Vegas, the whole world was gambling. This whole neighborhood was full of gamblers. The priest recalled a Sunday afternoon when he stumbled across his brother's busy dice game, where Vincent was likely the youngest of the 10 men looking to roll a natural. I must have been about 10 years old, he recounted. He had a big game, and I'm walking on the street. I live around the block here on the corner. He says, Louis, come here. So anyhow, that's the first time I ever shot dice. He says, take the dice, throw them. I did it. I did it to satisfy him. Maybe we'll get lucky with the kid. On another night, their mother dispatched the family's baby to deliver a message to his big brother. Young Louis initially had no idea where to look, but then decided to check in at a spot unknown to the local police. He walked into a nearby tenement, up the dark stairs and into a hallway on one of the upper floors. There was Vincent running his floating crap game. These guys are right into this stuff. The building's still there, the priest recalled, and that was the game. And he made money. He knew what the rules were, but everybody did it. So that was his life. He was a street kid all the time. One of the rules was that Chin kicked up some of his cash to the neighborhood's bigger fish. By then, Vito Genovese was back in town after his extradition from Italy, where he had fled for 8 years to dodge a murder rap. He was quickly accepted as the new padrone of Greenwich Village and took young Vincent under his wing. Vito Genovese was the most honored man in this neighborhood, recalled Lewis. Took care of everybody's needs. On Christmas, on holidays, he sponsored programs for the poor. That's how they operated. The Chin took his first adult pinch in 1945 for receiving stolen goods, the first of 7 arrests before his 25th birthday. He recalled those years as a time when he ran with local street gangs and took no lip. If somebody somehow irked the young Chin, um, he responded with his fists. The teenager moved from corner to corner back then, first on Sullivan Street, then in the renowned Stillman's Gym at 919 8th Avenue in Midtown Manhattan, the dank boxing hangout between 54th and 55th Streets. Featured 2 rings and a permanent funk conjured from years of perspiration and minimal attention to cleanliness. It was home to some of the fight game's big names: Rocky Graziano, Jack Dempsey, Georges Carpenter, or Jorge Carpenter, I don't know, Primo Carnera, Fred Apostoli, Joe Louis, and Rocky Marciano. All fighters, champs, and chumps paid the same 15-cent entry fee to enter a school of boxing higher education, 8th Avenue University, as it was known. Vincent Gigante, like his brother Ralph, and a strong, silent village kid named Dominic Cirillo, became students of the fight game, hanging at Stillman's in an era where the city gyms served as petri dishes for Mafia money-making schemes. Jake LaMotta was another Italian-American who turned to the ring for salvation, only to find a cesspool of corruption. He was forced to take a dive on November 14th, 1947 against an otherwise overmatched fighter named Billy Fox, who was managed by the mobbed up Frank Blinky Palermo, a Philadelphia gangster later jailed for extortion. LaMotta famously received a title shot after throwing the fight, and he captured the middleweight title. He told the whole sordid tale 13 years later to a U.S. Senate subcommittee investigating the fight game. Later, Robert De Niro won an Oscar for his portrayal of Jake LaMotta in Raging Bull. The same year as the fixed LaMotta fight, middleweight champion Rocky Marciano rejected a $100,000 bribe to dump a bout, which was later canceled. Managers were, by and large, a collection of thieves and almost to a man tied in with the mob. LaMotta wrote in Raging Bull, his Pull No Punches autobiography. Hey, maybe I should read that, eh? I bet you that's good. And I also noticed that around the gym, all the time there were the mob guys, for the very simple reason that there's always betting on fights, and betting means money, and whenever there's money, there's the mob. So it was no surprise that when Gigante stepped into the ring for his first bout, his manager was Tommy Ryan Aboli, a future head of the Genovese family, or that his sparring partner Cirillo would become a longtime friend and confidant as the two drifted into organized crime, or that his brother Ralph would also move from the ring into the same illegal arena. Chin apparently used the birth certificate of his brother and namesake, dead 19 years old, to land a professional boxing license. The fighter was just 16 when he stepped into the ring against Vic Chambers in Union City, New Jersey on July 18th, 1944. It was an even pairing, with Chambers fighting for only the third time. The Chin lost on points, but he returned to the ring 11 days later. The precocious boxer, standing 6 feet tall and fighting in the 175 light heavyweight division, revealed off 10 straight victories, reeled off 10 straight victories by decision, and twice fought on the undercard at Madison Square Garden. I'm wondering why he wasn't in the war. I would have gone and done that instead. That would have been. He scored the only knockout of his career in a 2-round defeat of undistinguished Frank Petrol on February 2nd, 1945. The loss put the beaten fighter's career mark at 4-6-1. He returned to the Mecca of boxing 4 months later to lose a 4-rounder against a fellow fighter with the same 10-1 record, Vic Chambers, whose only defeat had come in a rematch with Gigante. The Chin took their third fight in a 4-round decision. Kid brother Lewis recalled attending one of Vincent's fights at the Ridgewood Grove in Brooklyn. The closest thing the Chin had to a home base. Gigante fought there a half dozen times, winning 5. His last bout came there on May 17th, 1947, when Jimmy Slade scored a 7th-round TKO against the Chin. He was a very good boxer, his brother Lewis recalled. He fought a lot, and then he gave it up. Vincent Gigante stepped out of the ring with a career mark of 21-4. Despite his lack of power punch, a problem that Chin would rectify in the years ahead, Gigante underwent surgery on his nose in 1950, a remnant from his brief time as a fighter. Brother Ralph followed Chin into the ring in 1948, the start of a truncated career that lasted just 10 months and 14 fights. While compiling a mark of 9 wins, 3 losses and 2 draws, the 152-pounder made the pages of the New York Times after October 8, 1948 6-round decision over Chino Pralo of Mexico. The headliner that night was middleweight Rocky Castellano, another Italian kid. This one, an import from Luzerne, Pennsylvania. He scored a 7th-round knockout over hometown favorite Walter Cartier of the Bronx before a crowd of 2,465 at the St. Nicholas Arena, knocking the local kid on the floor 3 times in rapid succession, the last with a right to the jaw that put him down for good. Castellani was an up-and-comer managed by none other than the ubiquitous Oboli, whose connection to the city fight game ended with his arrest in Madison Square Garden. after Castellani lost a January 11th, 1952 fight to Ernie Durando. The manager ignited a brawl by punching referee Ray Miller in the ring. The mobbed up Ebola, apparently expecting a different result, flew into a rage when Miller stopped the fight in the 7th round after Castellani, a Marine who fought at Iwo Jima, was knocked down twice. Two of Castellani's other cornermen could do nothing to halt the rampaging Ebola, possessor of an Irish temper reflecting his mob nickname Tommy Ryan. Ebola and his, it's probably Eboli and his brother Patsy continued the rampage in the locker room, where they delivered a beatdown with fists and feet to matchmaker Al Weil. They knocked him to the floor and broke his glasses. Eboli was convinced that Dicey Weil was somehow behind the defeat. The assault, in addition to landing Eboli in court, was featured in Life magazine with a picture of the enraged manager on the ring apron as he advanced with menace towards Well. The magazine recounted the bizarre scene in a long expose of boxing corruption just months after the beating. According to the report, there were rumors that Well had double-crossed Eboli, raising the specter of a fixed fight. In a rematch 2 years later, Castellani won easily. Eboli's license was immediately suspended for life, and he spent 60 days in jail after pleading to a reduced charge. Not that it mattered much. By then, Eboli and Gigante were ready to move up in class. Okay, this is chapter 3, Changing of the Guards. Gigante turned 18 in 1946 between World War II and the Korean War. Not that the service was ever in the cards for him. Vincent was qualified 4F, unfit for duty to antisocial behavior, apparently linked to his teen arrests. His new career was with the Genovese family, got off to a rocky start. There was a 1947 arrest for grand larceny and auto arson. He settled with a plea to the reduced charge of malicious mischief and probation. The Chin did his first bit behind bars in 1950 after District Attorney Miles McDonald of Brooklyn started cracking down on local bookmakers and corrupt cops who took cash to look the other way. Gigante, along with a Sullivan Street pal named Peter Lombardi, was pot for distributing gambling cards to Brooklyn College students and other young bettors, even down to elementary school, charged prosecutor Julius Helfand. This was the eastern arm of a national betting syndicate that extended to St. Louis and Minneapolis, he said. Gigante told the arresting officer that he was a jobless tailor living in the village. Brooklyn College hoop star Michael DiTommaso, 21, identified Gigante as the guy who provided the gambling cards, where bettors had to pick the winners of 4 games from a slate of contests across the country to collect a $100 payout. Anyone who could nail 15 of 15 would get $500. DiTommaso said his take for peddling the cards on Gigante's behalf in December of 1949 and January of 1950 was $12 a week on a good week. A second Chin confidant was cleared of his part in the plot when he admitted printing the betting cards, but only he insisted to authorities because Gigante scared the hell out of him. Gigante was sentenced to 60 days in Rikers Island workhouse by an avuncular judge who passed along his advice for the Chin to wise up about the wise guys. We don't think you're totally bad, declared the sentencing judge. We would just like to pull you up by the bootstraps. The year 1950 was big for Gigante on the home front, too. Once he came out of jail, he married a neighborhood girl, Olympia Grippi, in a traditional Catholic ceremony at Our Lady of Pompeii. The pair had known each other for years, with the Chin first falling for her when they were both kids. She too came from a big Italian clan with 6 sisters and a brother. Gigante popped the question to his first love during Sunday Mass in the village. They moved in with his parents and then had 4 children in rapid succession: Yolanda, Roseanne, Salvatore, and Andrew. The growing clan moved several times as the family expanded, although they never went beyond a 2-block radius of Thompson and Bleecker streets. The newlywed Gigante was arrested once more in September 1951 after cops found him carrying 2 blackjacks. After he was put in cuffs 3 times in 1953, he paid a $1 fine for shooting dice, a throwback to his days as a village teen. A disorderly conduct charge was resolved without persecution. A bookmaking arrest resulted in a $75 fine. FBI documents indicate he was involved but never arrested for working with a car theft ring operating out of the village in 1955. The Chin and pal Dominic, Fat Dom, and Alongi were suspected of stealing late model Cadillacs and selling the hot luxury cars out of state. And then the Chin disappeared from the police blotter as he moved off the street and up the mob ladder. With the powerful Vito Genovese as his guru, Vincent was soon working as a gopher, a bodyguard, and then the future Don's driver. The latter was a position of importance, trusted with guarding the gangster's life. By now, Vito Genovese had beat his long-ago murder rap. The ambitious mafioso was accused of killing one of his business partners during a 1934 dispute over cutting up of the proceeds of a ripoff. After learning there was a witness ready to implicate him, Genovese bolted from for his homeland in 1937. After years of wrangling, he was finally brought home to face the consequences. However, the guy expected to sing was suddenly silenced for good. Cigar salesman Peter La Tempa never reached the witness stand. While in police protective custody at a Brooklyn jail, the damning witness fell ill and was given prescription painkillers to combat a bulky gallbladder. Instead, he wound up popping enough poison to kill 8 horses, according to an autopsy. It was hardly Genovese's first murder to serve his own ends. Authorities had long suspected the widower had ordered the husband of his second wife strangled in 1931 to clear the way for their own marriage. The young Vincent Gigante was never accused of any killings, mob or otherwise, but an FBI memo from the era flatly stated that he was up to the task. The Chin obtained his status and position via his reputation as an efficient hitman, the FBI document said, as well as through his close association with top Genovese associate Frank Thierry. Vincent landed a no-show job through the mob as a village building superintendent, where his lackadaisical approach to work nearly killed him. On the evening of May 12, 1956, Gigante arrived at St. Vincent's Hospital with a stab wound to the right side of his chest. A report in the long-defunct World Telegraph provided the details. The Chin wound up brawling with the black underling, infuriated because he was left to handle most of the work in Gigante's frequent absence. When some of Gigante's mob associates arrived to put a beating on the black male, a full-scale melee erupted as the victim's friends flew to his aid. Other problems were less complicated. The Chin collected and ignored a number of traffic tickets. At this point, Genovese was openly feuding with the family Frank Costello, a bootlegger once financed by legendary gambler Arthur Rothstein. Costello assumed the mantle as head of the nation's richest borgata, or family, following Luciano's conviction on a prostitution rap. Costello was regarded as the nation's most powerful mob boss and was widely referred to as the Prime Minister of the underworld. He arrived in New York from his native Italy in 1895 as a 4-year-old boy, and he never looked back. He did a 10-month stretch in 1915 after his arrest for carrying a pistol before moving into organized crime. The dapper and savvy Costello worked his way quickly toward the top of the mob hierarchy and was credited with calling a peace conference in the wake of the 1929 St. Valentine's Day massacre in Chicago. By the time Costello succeeded the deported Luciano as head of the family in 1946, he wielded considerable political power as well. Costello's close ties with the Manhattan Democratic Party organization, also known as Tammany Hall, gave him access to appoint judges and party leaders. Corruption busting Ex-New York Governor Thomas Dewey once ripped Costello as the gangster boss of Tammany Hall. Costello, also always tight-lipped about his business, once denied his role as a kingmaker by declaring he couldn't even fix a parking ticket. During a 1951 appearance before the Kefauver Committee, the Genovese family boss deflected questions about his vast influence. What was your ability? What was your ability to persuade politicians? One senator asked in the nationally televised hearing. I can't explain it, replied a raspy voiced Costello. The California Commission of Organized Crime offered a more cogent explanation. Costello's illegal businesses maintained a $400 million fund for bribing public officials. The West Coast agency also estimated that Costello's slot machines alone pulled in $2 billion a year. Despite his time on the lam, Genovese believed himself the rightful heir in the mob family throne. He was Luciano's underboss before bolting to Italy and intended to right the wrong of Costello's rise. Bitterness festered in the capo, and he fomented the same ill will among the family rank and file. He would wait for more than a decade before making his long-planned move. Taking down such a formidable target required precise planning and a small, silent group of participants. It was eventually conceived as a two-man job, one shooter, one getaway driver. The gunman was reportedly handpicked by Anthony Tony Bender Cirillo, a Genovese capo from the village. On the evening of May 2nd, 1957, Costello went out for dinner and drinks on the east side of Manhattan, a few blocks from his palatial apartment on Central Park West. He was joined by Philip Kennedy, a sometime semi-pro baseball player, now reinvented as an actor and modeling agency manager. The two dined in Chandler's restaurant at 49 West 49th Street before heading to meet Costello's wife and National Enquirer publisher Gennaro's Pope at L'Aiglon on East 55th Street. The urbane underworld figure who believed his problems with Genovese were a thing of the past, traveled the city without a worry or a bodyguard. Costello and Kennedy made one more stop, grabbing a drink at Monsignor down the block by Lake Geelong. When Kennedy suggested a final nightcap, he was overruled by the boss. Costello wanted to get home and field a phone call from powerhouse Washington lawyer Edward Bennett Williams, the future owner of the Redskins. The two hailed a cab outside Monsignor's around 10:40 p.m. and headed uptown to Costello's residence at Majestic, just across the street from both Central Park and the equally upscale Dakota. Another car made the same trip earlier in the evening, carrying two men. The large black car with fins on its rear was driven by Tommy Aboley. Riding Alongside him, armed with a revolver, was his old boxing charge, Vincent Gigante. The Chin had prepared for this night for weeks in advance, eating and shooting and shooting and eating. The formerly fit Gigante had intentionally bulked up to 300 pounds, a hedge against future identification by any eyewitness. He invested a considerable amount of time in taking target practice in the week before the two men double parked in the darkness of on Central Park West near 72nd Street and waited patiently. The cab with Costello stopped outside the 30-story building with its spectacular views, and the boss walked inside as Kennedy paid the driver. Before the taxi could pull away from the curb, Kennedy recalled he heard a blast like a large firecracker. Costello was inside the Art Deco building's stately foyer when the hulking Chin blew past the building's doorman in hot pursuit, a revolver in his right hand pointed directly at the shocked boss. As he approached Costello, Gigante delivered a menacing 5-word line that proved more bark than actual bite. "This one's for you, Frank." Sufficiently warned, Costello spun, threw up his hands, and instinctively flinched. The bumbling Gigante squeezed the trigger of a 38 caliber revolver from point-blank range, firing a single shot which reverberated through the marble lobby like someone had just fired a cannon and missed his target. The kill shot was a near miss. Costello suffered a gory-looking scalp wound, but nothing more. As the blood poured from Costello's head, the rotund Gigante, more than 150 pounds above his fighting weight, waddled from the scene without firing another bullet. On or checking to make sure the job was done. With the roar of its revving engine, the black car zipped away beneath the sparkling skyline. A stunned Kennedy paid the cabbie and ran inside to see what had happened. Costello was hunched over, holding a handkerchief now crimson with blood to the side of his head, bleeding head. Two terrified building employees stood frozen nearby in disbelief. With his night on the town having come to an abrupt finish, Kennedy ran back outside to hail another cab. He led the bleeding Costello to the street, loading him into a cab, and ordered the hack to hightail it to Roosevelt Hospital on 12th Avenue. Word of the attempted assassination tore across the city so quickly that cops and reporters were already there when Costello's cab arrived at 11:08 p.m. The mob boss later told his attorney that one thought ran through his mind during the ride downtown. He was going to die. He did not. The magic bullet had entered through the front of Costello's fedora and exited through the back, traveling along his skull from left to right and tearing off a chunk of flesh above his right ear. The bullet slammed into the lobby wall, with cops later recovering 2 bullet fragments. Costello was quickly patched up and sent on his way, exiting the hospital with his hat, bullet holes in its front and rear. pulled tight over a head wrap. Bloodstains marred his pricey double-breasted brown suit as Costello waded into the waiting crowd. It became immediately evident that he had no intentions of violating the mob's oath of omerta and would keep his mouth shut tight about the entire near-death experience. I didn't see anything, he told the disappointed homicide detectives at Roosevelt. On his way to a car parked outside, Costello was accompanied by his wife, who was decked out in a dress and a fur stole. Costello even flashed a smile for the horde of photographers. The New York Times ran a photo of Costello on its front page, while the tabloid Daily News went with the larger type only: Frank Costello is shot. In smaller print below, a ambushed at apartment door. Ambushed at apartment door. Below that came the news that red baiting Senator Joe McCarthy had died. The building doorman, a gentleman named Norval Keith, got a pretty good look at the well-dressed and well-nourished shooter, who wore a dark suit with a matching hat. Cab driver Samuel Misseveth, who rushed the bleeding boss to the hospital, gave a first-person account to the news about his famous fare. It hits me like a flash. Frank Costello, the cabbie recounted. Kennedy ordered Miss Seventh to mind his own business and drive before returning his attention to the bloodied mob chieftain. Don't worry, Frank, Kennedy had said. Say a black Cadillac hit you. McSeventh deduced there was more to the story. There's something crazy here, I figured. You don't get hit by a black Cadillac in an apartment building lobby. A pale and nervous Costello said little as they sped through Manhattan. Once at Roosevelt, Costello gave the cabbie $5 for 45-cent fare for a 45-cent fare. The audacious attempt on Costello's life was a sensation from coast to coast, and the shooter was in the wind. The New York Police Department launched a full court press to track down the would-be killer, with more than 60 detectives assigned to the investigation. They rousted more than 200 people, including a who's who of mob bigwigs, and grilled them all. Concerned the assassin could return and finish the job, the cops assigned a pair of detectives to the lobby where the bullets flew. The initial police description of the as yet unidentified suspect was between 30 and 35 years old, 6 feet tall, heavy thighs, pot belly, wears a size 50 suit, and waddles while he walks. The city's tabloid seized on the details, and the fugitive's gunman became the waddler or the fat man. Whatever you called him, the shooter with the flabby physique was the most wanted man in the country, with the combined forces of the FBI, the Coast Guard, and somewhat bizarrely the Motor Vehicle Bureau all came into the pursuit. Even Western Union was alerted to keep an eye out for any kind of suspicious activity, particularly a money transfer. As the hunt for the shooter heightened, the architect of the hit, Vito Genovese, hunkered down in his Atlantic Highlands, New Jersey compound. Bodyguards surrounded him in case the failed murder sparked a war within the family. The first break in the probe offered another clue to the amateurish effort. The black getaway car had an outstanding recent parking ticket that raised alarms. The cops ran the plates and discovered that Gigante's purchased the car 2 weeks before the botched hit. By May 16th, the cops had the Chin's name. While they didn't have, what they didn't have was the Chin or anybody or any idea how to find him, given the silence on the streets about the failed hit. A 49 notice was sent to every detective squad in the city with a picture of Gigante and word that he was wanted for questioning in the Costello shooting. Word leaked to the papers in early June with the suspect's identity setting off another media feeding frenzy. Chief of the detectives, James B. Leggett, was uncomfortably fielding questions about the previously unknown Gigante, who had suddenly made the leap from mob obscurity to the fugitive celebrity. I only wanted him for questioning because he answers the physical description of the man who did the shooting, said Leggett, downplaying the news. He was blunter when asked about the Chin's odds of survival now that his name was known. If anything happens to him, it won't be on my conscience. Newspaper reports linked Gigante with Cirillo, who had reportedly met with Costello earlier on the day of the shooting to get a handle on the boss's evening itinerary. The Chin had served as an occasional bodyguard for his village compadre, Tony Bender. An ancient FBI document offered testament to Cirillo's loyalty to Don Vito and his resume, which had just expanded to include attempted murder. The FBI summary stated, Strollo has a reputation of being a racketeer of the notorious hoodlum Vito Genovese, and is considered the hoodlum who controls all the illegal activities in the Greenwich Village area. The informant advised that Strollo was the top man in shylocking, bookmaking, and gambling activities in the Greenwich Village area. The Daily News expressed its dismay that the suspect, wanted as the nation's most notorious non-marksman, was nothing more than a FedEx pug and underworld hanger-on. Further media disappointment came when Gigante's no-show handyman job became public knowledge. This nondescript schlub was the daring and elusive mob killer who tried to take down Frank Costello. In the next few days, all law enforcement and court personnel in the city received a stop card calling for the Chin's immediate detention, and the New York Police Department began to put the squeeze on the Gigante family, particularly Vincent's pretty young wife and his two reputable mobbed up brothers, Mario and Ralph. Civilian sibling Pascal was also questioned. Kid brother Louis, 2 years away from his ordainment as a priest, received a pass for good behavior. Olympia Gigante, alone at their 135 Beaker Street apartment, was visited anywhere from 15 to 20 times by the NYPD. Dubbed a sultry brunette by the city tabloids, the young wife kept her mouth shut and stood by her missing man, a pattern that continued for the rest of her life. He's not around, she told the New York Herald Tribune. I don't know where he is. He disappeared. The loyal spouse gave police the same line. Their response to put the Gigantes' cramped Greenwich Village home under round-the-clock surveillance. Mario and Ralph took a more confrontational approach. Mario, 33, was driving a car with a dead headlight when cops pulled him over on August 12, 1957, at the corner of Sullivan and Prince Streets. Riding shotgun was brother Ralph, 27. As things escalated from bad to worse when a detective moved in to frisk the brothers. Mario, nabbed for driving without a license, uncorked a roundhouse punch at the unsuspecting cop. Both brothers were immediately arrested. Mario was charged with felonious assault, and Ralph was with vagrancy. Each carried a wad of cash with $717 recovered from Ralphie and $671 from Mario. Cops found a hatchet and a baseball bat inside the car. Neither would be much help in changing a flat. 9 days later, when tempers on both sides cooled, Mario paid a $30 fine, $25 for a reduced charge of disorderly conduct, and $5 for the headlight. However, 3 months after the Costello hit attempt, the cops were no closer to putting their cuffs on the portly prey. It was the Chin himself who finally ended the coast-to-coast manhunt. Vincent Gigante looked quite a bit different when he walked into the West 54th Street Police Precinct on August 17th than he did departing the Majestic in his 3 months earlier. The Chin's expansive gut had noticeably receded over the summer, and Gigante had swapped his thick tangle of black hair for a crew cut. His new high and tight look was recorded for posterity in front and side views via his mugshot. His attorney, David M. Markowitz, accompanied him as he casually arrived around noon. Gigante was as terse in the precinct as he had been in the lobby of the Majestic. Do you want me in the Costello case? Then he stopped talking. Cops wasted no time in tracking down Costello, hopeful the slick boss's memory could be jogged by the sight of the thuggish gangster in the much thinner flesh. Costello was at the precinct by 4:45 p.m., arriving in an unmarked NYPD vehicle and accompanied by 3 city detectives. 15 minutes later, with a smile on his face and a cigarette in his hand, Costello strutted confidently from the precinct. He offered no comment to the reporters outside, or as it turned out, to the investigators inside. Deputy Inspector Frederick Lewson nevertheless characterized the stop that characterized the tact to turn Costello as a very cooperative. Leave it. The feared mobster was later brought back for a second round of questioning with the exact same results. Nothing. Leggett described the suspect as a small-time gambler, while the Times expressed surprise that Gigante was still breathing after his monumental miss. In a rather Times-like passage, the paper raised the possibility that Gigante had been feared the possible victim of a gangland ride. Costello's pal Kennedy seized the surrender as an opportunity to reiterate 100% that he absolutely, positively had no idea who pulled the trigger that spring night. He definitely had not identified the man who turned himself in. It's a closed incident as far as I'm concerned. Markowitz insisted his client, who had rarely ever, or if ever, ventured beyond the village, was living about 500 miles away from the city during the manhunt. North, south, west. The lawyer never offered any details. He additionally insisted that Gigante had an alibi. He was down in the village when the shot was fired, and he had learned about the Costello hit from the radio. There were no doubt friends and family willing to swear to his whereabouts. Gigante's sudden return thrust the cast back into the national spotlight. After the Chin's surrender, national gossip columnist Dorothy Kilgallen wrote beneath an item on the debutante daughter of deep-pocketed philanthropist Cornelius Vanderbilt Whitney weighed in with the scuttlebutt on the suspect. On August 28, 1957, Kilgallen wrote, "A surprising number of chaps in the underworld guffaw at the idea of Vincent the Chin Gigante being the one who shot Frank Costello. They admit he's a rough type, but they don't believe he's the one who creased Uncle Frank's skull." Prosecutors didn't bother to call Kilgallen as a witness. The legendary office of District Attorney Frank Hogan quickly asked for $150,000 bail on Gigante. That was a staggering sum for the Times, and especially for a case that wasn't murder. And an outraged Markowitz dismissed it as a sum which is entirely out of line. Yep, I think that's about it. So I think that's where I'm going to sum up for today. Yeah, Manhattan Judge George Tilzer cut the defense lawyer short. Gigante has shown an open defiance of law and order. This is a serious matter. All right, so I'm on page, what is that, 38? Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Interesting character. Anyways, we're going to sum up there on page 38. Some interesting reading. I don't know where my bookmark went on that one. I'll have to get another one on the go here. So yeah, that's another hour and 4 minutes, hour and 5 minutes of the Chin, or just Chin, the life and crimes of Mafia boss Vincent Gigante by Larry McShane. It's been an interesting read so far. I thank everyone for following this one too. It's a pretty interesting book. We're going to be mobbed up on our education here on the Mafia. How it is all later tag all day. Anyways, that's my second reading for today. I just wanted to kind of catch up and keep reading. So I read you 5 by 5. I'm out.